Welcome to Litigate on Fire, episode number 1, Child Support Challenges in the New York State Family Courts. I am attorney Amanda Schaefer. Very excited about our new series. Before I get to our first episode, quick reminder, don't forget to like us and follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, wherever you're watching. If you find this video to be helpful and know someone who may, go ahead and click that share button, that save button. Drop me a comment. Let me know what you're thinking and if you have any questions. I've been excited about this video series for a while. I just haven't had time to make it. And this has all stemmed from my decade plus years of experience with the courts and with the problems that clients have been facing over the years. Built up of frustrations for sure, but there's a lot of injustices that are occurring, and I'm hoping with this series to spread awareness and shed some light on some of these issues that people not familiar with the system may know, and maybe effectuate some type of change, because there is some reforms that are certainly needed. None of this is meant to be political. This is really just meant to be my firsthand experience with the court system. And I also am going to be talking about both past cases and active cases, so I will be very careful with regards to the details that I provide. And of course, if you do need an attorney, our contact information is scrolling across the bottom of your screen. So, this idea kind of stemmed primarily from a specific case that I am handling in family court. It's a child support proceeding. Now, I was not the attorney initially. Now, before I get to that case, I want to explain the functions of the New York State family courts. Now, there are family courts pretty much in every state. I do not practice law in every state. I am going to be talking specifically about New York family courts. I am licensed to practice in New Jersey, and my partner is licensed to practice in Connecticut. However, most of my experience is with the New York State Family Court, so that is what I will be focused on. So the New York State Family Courts were made in order to increase access to justice in an expeditious fashion. So the civil courts were definitely overburdened. They also had a problem because people were having trouble affording lawyers, and there's not enough public defenders or legal aid to go around for everyone. So they created the family court system to supposed to be more flexible, the rules, make it easier for people to represent themselves, and again, to have these things go faster. Well, I could tell you, since I began practicing, things have just gotten slower and slower and slower. I can't even say they're any faster than the civil courts at this point. They also have things like no filing fees for motions and petitions, which makes it easier for people to get the relief that they need from the court. However, there's various hurdles that people face, and I have kind of kept silent for a long time, but it's come to a head. It's come to a head because some of the things that have been happening lately in the court system, it has been really atrocious. So that's what we're here to talk about. So today I want to focus on child support. Now, in child support proceedings, you do have a right to be represented by an attorney. However, if you cannot afford one, you do not have a right to a free attorney. Only if you are facing a possible term of imprisonment due to a violation for failure to pay child support, a willful violation. That's the only time, if you can't afford an attorney, you will be appointed one. Otherwise, you are left to fend for yourself. And that can be very difficult, especially when there's the initial child support order has a mistake, or whether it's an intentional mistake or not. Trying to modify the orders can be very difficult. So the idea for this video series, as I was saying, kind of stems from this one case that I have to be very careful about discussing since it's still ongoing. However, the injustices that my client is facing is so extreme that I couldn't bite my tongue any longer and wanted to shed some light on these issues. So this case, it's a really complicated case. So I'm going to try my best to sum it up, and then talk more about really the issues that it brings up. Essentially, this client did not know he had a right to a lawyer. He is from another country, did live in the U.S. for a few years. His divorce was in the other country. If his divorce was in New York, this wouldn't even be happening because they wouldn't be allowed to have been divorced without having a child support order. However, in his country, they were. And in his country, when they do the divorce and these types of proceedings, they're not entitled to a lawyer. And he did not know that he was here. So in the first hearing, the judge did not adequately advise him of his rights and obtain an explicit waiver. What do I mean by that? Well, I think the easiest or the most common thing that people out there watching may know is if you've ever heard of Miranda rights. Those are when you get arrested and the cops tell you you have the right to remain silent. You have a right to an attorney if you cannot afford one. One will be provided for you. Those types of rights. And if you're not read your Miranda rights, that can ultimately create a problem for the prosecution in trying to convict you of an offense. Well, in family court, you don't have a right to a free attorney if you cannot afford one, like I said, unless you're facing jail time for a willful violation. But you're still supposed to be adequately advised of your right to get an attorney, to an adjournment if you want an attorney, and the court's supposed to obtain an explicit waiver of that right to an attorney. So in this case, I did order the transcript from that first hearing because I wasn't the attorney yet, and it was clear my client was not adequately advised of his rights. He proceeded pro se, so representing himself, and ultimately the court claimed he missed 2 court dates, entered a default order, and then a whole bunch of things happened. Now, just to make it clear, this all stems from the default order, and which was, in my opinion, entered wrongfully. He was in another country at the time. The first court date he did not miss. Actually, they changed the court date and didn't tell him. And then they told him after the fact and rescheduled it. And I know this because they emailed him, and we have the emails. For the next court date, it was after daylight savings time here in the U.S. So it was, I think, in March. I think actually it's coming up because I'm filming this in March. But in his country, they didn't have daylight savings time. So even though he had lived in the U.S. for a few years, going to school, when he went back home, his country has since reinstated daylight saving time, but it's on a different date. But at the time he didn't. So he ended up showing up 45 minutes late to court. And he emailed the court when they didn't let him into the waiting room, and they told him, you missed court, a default order is entered, you'll get it in the mail. Now, he did send documents in advance of this trial date to prove his income. Because he was self-employed, he had to show what his expenses were, showing that, shows his intent to appear. And what he ended up doing after that default was he filed an objection. Now, he's not a lawyer, so he didn't know that wasn't the proper procedural mechanism. He should have filed a motion to vacate. He ended up filing one after the fact. Again, there's some complicated procedural issues that come in. I'm not going to go through all of that. I came into play after his driver's license had been suspended by the support collection unit. And something that he could have possibly prevented had he received notice on time. So here's problem number one. My client said, I don't live in the US. And he wasn't in the US. He wasn't living in the US when he said this in virtual court. And they said, well, we need a US address to send stuff to. And he's like, can you send me by email? They're like, yeah, but we still need a US address. So he gave them an address of the last place he lived, not knowing that that was going to matter because the court was sending him all documents electronically. However, after the default order was entered and it went to the support collection unit, they started sending mail to his home and not emailing him, or not to his home, I'm sorry, to his address in New York. And he had no idea. Now, he was waiting to come back this time. Now, this started during COVID, and he was waiting to come back to the US on a valid work visa. So, if anyone's familiar with an H-1B visa, that's what he had an approved H-1B, and he had to go back to his country to go to the visa interview. But then COVID shut everything down. So he ended up waiting 2 years to come back. And unbeknownst to him, while that was happening, the child support collection unit had sent a notice that they were going to suspend his driver's license, and he had 45 days to challenge that. Now, in his country, where he had recently gotten divorced and they don't have attorneys at these proceedings, if you challenge an order, like a child support order, it stays the order, which means that the order doesn't go into effect while your challenge is pending. So if you are supposed to pay $1,000 a month in child support, you don't have to pay that yet. Now, in the US, or at least in New York, works a little different. They rarely issue stays. You'd have to request it, but they rarely issue them. You have to start paying no matter how unfair the order is. You're supposed to start paying. And if you don't, you start to accrue arrears. And when you accrue a certain amount of arrears, it triggers the family court and the support collection unit's ability to use their enforcement tools. And those tools range from imprisonment to driver's license suspensions to professional license suspensions to withholding tax refunds, income, etc. Now, in his case, he has a job. He has a professional job where it requires him to be able to drive to different work sites during the day to whatever he does, manage whatever he's managing. And it's a key, an integral part to his job. And it was part of the job description for his H-1B. I'm not going to go into a long, complicated explanation of an H-1B visa, what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do. The main point that you need to know is that when you come to the US on a work visa, you can only work for the company that sponsored you, and you have to do the job they sponsored you for. You have to get paid what they said to the government they were going to pay you. You cannot do any extra work, like drive an Uber after work or work at Starbucks. And if you want to switch jobs, you have to petition for the switch, and it has to be an equivalent job. It has to be what's called a special, depending on the work visa. For an H-1B, you need a specialty occupation, which requires a bachelor degree or higher, or the equivalent years of experience. So he's an engineer, which is vague enough for me to say. And his type of engineering required him to go to, I think, construction sites and kind of oversee them and do whatever he does. So when he got back to the US on the H-1B finally, his company was notified his license would be suspended somehow, and they fired him. He was able to find a new job within the 60-day grace period, but he had to get his driver's license did get suspended. He was too late to challenge it because he didn't receive the notice until after the 45-day period expired because he wasn't here, and they wouldn't accept the challenge. But they did say he can get a restricted license, which is great, except it only allows you to drive to one work site and back. And that was a problem. If you violate your immigration status in any way, or you get arrested, then you risk, like arrested for driving with a suspended license, you risk losing your ability to stay in lawful status in the US, and in his case, get a green card. So he was kind of in a bad place. And finally, someone said to him when he was going back and forth, like, what am I supposed to do? They finally said, well, get a lawyer. So that's when I came in. I was hired because of my knowledge in both immigration and family law, because it was a really complicated issue. So, I've thought about this episode a lot and what I was going to talk about, and I might have to make multiple episodes here. But the main thing I want to focus on is this one enforcement tool of suspension of a driver's license, because to me, I there needs to be consequences for people when they don't pay their child support. There's no question. However, this is self-defeating. It makes it impossible for this individual and many in a similar position to actually make money to pay the child support order. Now, the first problem was because they entered the default order, despite the fact that he had what's called excusable neglect, meaning he did not intentionally miss this court appearance. If he had an attorney, he definitely wouldn't have missed it. I know for me, since we stopped having to change our clocks during daylight savings time, I don't even know it's happened half the time, to be honest. So to blame someone who doesn't even live here, despite the fact that he lived here for a few years before then, to know the daylight savings time in the US when it is, I think that's a little absurd. And you have to look at his other actions. The only reason he missed a previous court date is because they changed it without telling him, and we had proof of that from the court. So he hadn't missed court. He submitted evidence to support his claim that his income was lower than that listed on his tax return, since he was self-employed and he had a lot of expenses. And the judge wouldn't enter that evidence on the record because he wasn't there. So what happened was, because the support collection unit suspended his driver's license, he lost his job, as I said. And that meant that he couldn't pay the child support order. So he filed a bunch of things, some right, some wrong, trying to remedy the situation. Now, the child support suspension you can challenge. And if you lose your challenge, you can then file a challenge in the court, in the family court, to review it. And they can overturn it if it's manifestly unfair. And they can also vacate the underlying order that led to the order being issued. So what ended up happening is that we're still working on this case. We did file an emergency motion to lift the driver's suspension. That actually was granted. And then he went to the child support collection unit and said, here's the court order to lift my suspension. Please lift my suspension. They said no. And then they filed an opposition. Now, saying he didn't exhaust his administrative remedies, which I want to say they filed an opposition without reading the motion that we filed requesting the suspension, which was very comprehensive and explained everything, including the fact that he very much so had an excusable neglect that did comport with the available case law. So we're still in this battle right now. And the problem is he can't get a new H-1B job. He also can't, a lot of times child support cases, you might, even a lawyer, if you had a lawyer as a party to the case, and the lawyer says, "Oh, I lost my job. I can't find, nobody wants to hire me." Well, the court's going to say, go drive an Uber, go work at Starbucks, go work at Home Depot. And that's legitimate. You have kids to support, go do something. Problem is, when you're here on a visa, you can't, you don't have that freedom. If he went to, even drove an Uber, well, it's assuming this wasn't a driver's license issue, he would be in violation of his H-1B status. He would have to leave the country, and he likely would not be able to come back. And it turns out what engineers make in his country is a fraction of what they make here when you account for the exchange rate. So in the US, he can make six figures. In his country, that's like four figures. So it's a big problem because he needs to be able to pay, and he wants to pay, but he needs a job, but he can't get a job because his driver's license is restricted to only being able to drive to one place every day, and every job that he's eligible for requires him to drive to multiple jobs. So it's a catch-22. So you would think, okay, well, these courts, they're here for justice. They want parents to pay for their children. They want to do the right thing. Well, I've been on this case now for almost a year, and we really haven't gotten very far. When I found out he wasn't properly advised of his right to counsel, I filed a request to renew his motion to vacate because he had filed it before I was representing him. And the court denied my motion, claiming I didn't raise adequate grounds for newly discovered evidence to vacate, although the newly discovered evidence was, we ordered the transcript and found out he wasn't adequately advised of his right to counsel. And had he been, he's like, I would have, because of how complicated it was with the immigration situation. And, I don't even know what to say. I 100% understand and respect the support collection unit's duty and authority to enforce the child support laws to make sure that parents are adequately supporting their children financially. What I don't understand is why they would fight to keep a suspension on someone's driver's license when, forget the underlying merits of the case. Forget, is he right or wrong in that the child support amount was incorrect. He wasn't saying he shouldn't pay. He's saying it should have been lower because it was based off of the gross sales of his company when he was self-employed, not off of what the Child Support Act says to use, which is your total income, which basically, more or less, there's certain subtractions and additions to income that the statute requires, but essentially you subtract the taxes, and if you're self-employed, reasonable business expenses. So no reasonable business expenses were subtracted. So it came out to an amount much higher than he can have. And then remember, he got fired right after he came into the US because his company was notified of the suspension, which, in my opinion, was not correct to do. So the real problem here is, why would the support collection unit file an opposition months later? Because they're basically mad that the court's telling them telling them what to do. They do have authority to suspend the license. The court also has the authority to tell them to lift it when it's just makes no sense. This guy cannot earn money until his driver's license is lifted. The problem is with the family court is that it's been taking so long. And in this family court, I won't say the borough that he's in, they have like 1 or 2 support magistrates, and these magistrates are coming in and out. So this case has already been passed off to 4 different judges. So that means every time we appear and there's a new judge, they say, "Oh, I don't know the case. You got to come back." And then it's another 2, 3 months. And this just keeps happening. So we're not even getting anything accomplished when we go to court. They don't even know what the case is about. And then I see this time and time again when you have an unrepresented party on the other end, or a party who's represented by an attorney who doesn't keep their clients in line. They give them, the waterworks. They give them, I'm the victim. I should, feel bad for me, which I'm not saying that the petitioner, the ex-wife in this case, that she's wrong to want child support or wrong to feel that she's not getting a fair it's not fair to her that she's not getting child support payments, but she's also the one fighting. She could have consented to having the driver's license lifted. She's fighting it, which to me makes no sense. But you see this a lot, and it can take the judges time to really realize, okay, this person keeps complaining about the same thing over and over, keeps making this, giving the same wishy-washy story. It's actually probably BS, and I need to think about this differently. So, number one problem here, passing it from judge to judge to judge because they can't keep them in the court. And they don't have enough. So the court dates are so far out. So this guy, I think the initial judgment was entered in 2022. Maybe 2021. No, it started in 2021, but the default was 2022. And he's been trying to remedy this, and he has legitimate reasons that the order should be vacated and a new trial should be ordered on the issue of child support so he could present his case to the judge. Because again, he tried to attend court. He had a reasonable, excusable neglect on why he didn't appear, and he's just been ignored despite his explanation of everything. So I'm left on the other end trying to remedy it. The second problem here is, again, the enforcement tools at the disposal of SCU, and that they don't communicate with the courts. They're on their own accord. They can, use these enforcement tools, which is perfectly fine in many situations. But when, so some people, you get your driver's license suspended, you can get the restricted license to go to and from work. But again, if you have to go to different workplaces in one day, that's not going to help you because the restricted license doesn't account for that. So it feels just so unjust and so unfair that this guy is being demonized for not paying his child support, even though he can't get a job because he needs to be able to drive, but they suspended his license because he failed to show up at court because of daylight savings time. And there's proof that he was there. He would have been there on time when he thought it was, that he did submit evidence in advance showing he intended to show up as well. And if he had a lawyer, if he knew he had that right, he would have not missed court because I would have called him and been like, "Where are you?" Now, I know what you might be thinking. Well, how is this guy paying you if he cannot pay his child support order? Well, he's maxed out his credit cards to pay us because he's like, he needs to get he couldn't, there just wasn't a choice. He had to do something. He figured out a way. And he's probably not going to pay me for a long time now. And I'm going to be doing this on faith because I could have withdrawn from the case, but I felt this has been really bothering me. I just could, I've seen a lot of things in the courts that are wrong, but this, it just blows my mind. What is what is everyone thinking here? And why would you take away this man's ability to do his job and then while while at the same time uh, knowing that he doesn't have any alternatives? Like I said, you can suspend a lawyer's license to practice law because they failed to pay child support, and that's happened. But even if that were me, which I don't have children, um, nor would I hope that, God forbid, that would ever happen if I did. But if that were me, I could go work at Starbucks. I could do contract review. I can't do lawyer work, but I could do paralegal work. I could go work at Walmart. Drive from because we're not talking about a driver's license. I could drive an Uber. Whatever the case may be, I can make money. But this guy can't, because if he does, he violates his immigration status. He can't get another H-1B, even if he finds a new job. He has to leave the country, and he cannot find an equivalent job for equivalent pay in his country. And the New York State Child Support Act does not take into it technically takes into consideration cost of living when the parents live in separate places, but really they base it off of what New York says it should be. And he has to be able to make that argument in front of the judge, which he hasn't been able to make. So I'm going to wrap this one up. I might come back to this issue. I'll definitely want to talk more about the procedural problems that we've been facing in this court. But essentially, the two issues I want to highlight, I'm hoping I highlighted here, was that the family courts, they need more funding. They need more judges. And they need the family courts and the child support collection unit, the two entities charged with enforcing the child support laws. They need to use enforcement tools that make sense for the case. And when it's brought to their attention that one of the tools they're using is completely hindering a party from earning enough money to pay a child support order, it should not be difficult to get that enforcement mechanism removed. And in this case, the suspension on the driver's license. If you have any questions about this, if you faced a similar problem or you need a lawyer to represent you, my contact information is scrolling across the bottom of the screen. We'll be back soon with episode number 2, where we'll delve most likely more into the procedural issues in family court. And hopefully, I would like to give some recommendations on how these things can be handled, one of which would be better communications between the court and the agencies tasked to enforce the court orders. I hope you found this useful. If you did, please hit that share button, hit that save button, drop me a comment, let me know what you liked, what you didn't like, and like us and follow us so you don't miss any future episodes. That is all for today. Thank you for watching and have a great day.